Welcome to the Psychedelic Mindscape, a podcast that delves into two fascinating topics, psychedelics and leadership. I'm your host, Victoria Lauren, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Sabrina Hadeed. Sabrina has a PhD in Counselor Education and Supervision and a master's degree in Existential Phenomenological Psychology. She has been a therapist for 20 years working in the psychedelic space. She is also the author of Microdose Your Marriage and is the host of a podcast by the same name. Welcome, Sabrina. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for all that you bring to the world, to this podcast. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, so you and I got connected initially at an event called Drugs Over Dinner,
That's
which
right.
fantastic name. I mean, honestly, right there, I was sold. I was like, I don't even know what this is about, but I am there.
Totally. I know. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. It's a movement. Yeah, it's this movement that actually came from Death Over Dinner, which was a course that these professors at the University of Washington offered because they were trying to sort of challenge the cultural norm where we don't tend to talk about end of life stuff. We don't tend to talk about our fear of death or the death of loved ones. And so the course was so wildly successful that it later turned into a TED Talk, and then, it merged into psychedelics and talking about drugs over dinner as, as something that kind of came out of that to try and challenge the stigma around drugs, right? Psychedelics. And what better place than to do it when we're gathering and breaking bread together and, that kind of like disarming environment of having a meal with someone. So that was, anybody can run. Like if you want to have a drugs over dinner event in your home or in, a bigger space like we did, you can. And there's a whole website dedicated to it with prompt questions that you could just have, with at family dinner. It's a pretty great idea.
I
Yeah.
loved it. Yeah. For me, especially because it dove, at least the table that I was at, we spent a lot of time. There was several moms and new mamas at
Mm,
the table. So we
mm,
spent a lot of time talking on psychedelics and parenthood, and psychedelics and pregnancy. And so it was really
mm.
beautiful because I had approached my primary care physician saying, hey, like, what's your take on microdosing during pregnancy? Like, I've been getting questions about this and I want to know. And her response was, well, no, just a flat out no.
Don't do drugs while pregnant,
Don't do
period.
drugs while pregnant. And that, like when you say it, you're like, well,
Sure.
yeah, that makes sense. Sure. Right. But then, so I kind of just closed the door on it. And then later it dawned on me that, she didn't provide me with any resources or evidence. And so I went back saying, hey, so how did you come to that conclusion? Where did that recommendation come from? And
Holding
then
your doctor accountable is such an important thing because they
it
don't have
really
all the
is.
answers,
They
right?
don't. Exactly. It's like the lab coat, like,
I
doesn't actually
know.
mean that they know everything.
So true.
So
And I love too that story because it shows our tendency as humans, whether you're a medical doctor or not, to dismiss something right away without taking the time to consider, process, talk it through. You know, Honestly, one of my favorite answers that a medical professional can give you is, I'm not sure or I don't know.
yes,
Like I
yes.
love that and respect it. That may sound almost like overtly like wrong, like, wait, but if you don't have the answer, why am I coming to you? Well, but I also want to trust you. And if you don't know anything about the safety of microdosing while pregnant or ingesting small, right? That's what we're talking about. Ingesting
Right.
small amounts of a psychedelic. First of all, you didn't even ask me what psychedelic you're talking about. You didn't ask me, are you talking about
Right.
LSD? Are you talking about psilocybin? Are you talking about, ayahuasca? Are you talking about, what are you talking about? What's a microdose? Like, the doctor really should have said, gosh, I really don't know. And they could have owned their bias. That would have been beautiful too. Like,
Yes.
I hesitate to ever have, pregnant mamas take something that we just don't know enough about. That's going to boost the trustworthiness of the doctor.
Yes.
Like, thank you. I
Yes.
want to be protected as a mom and my unborn child. And if you don't know, then tell me you don't know and point me in a direction where I can get the answers that I need. Because the reality, I was being playful and flippant when I said, well, don't do drugs when you're pregnant. Yes, of course, everybody knows that. But like, what are we talking about with drugs? I mean, herbal supplements, are you taking a plant for
Right.
nausea, like peppermint? I mean, lavender, all those things, chamomile. There was a time where we didn't have these sort of Western white coated modern medicine docs telling us what we should and shouldn't do. And
Yeah.
so that's important.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think, where I was coming from with it is that if you've got someone who's taking SSRIs and they're trying to, right, taper off of those because they don't want to
Yeah.
be on those throughout pregnancy,
Hmm.
well, then, what kind of support can we provide them? Are we
Yeah.
just going
Yeah.
to leave them floating in the wind? And then,
Yeah.
your stress, your anxiety, your
Yeah, you're
depression.
you're playing the risks, right? It's a game. And any
Mhm.
doc, any mental health lens is going to do that for pregnant moms specifically. And it's really important. I know one of the SSRIs that has the safest profile, for instance, that's used for women that are pregnant and in postpartum is Zoloft, sertraline. It's been around a long
Right.
time. And we have really good research, right? And like I'm talking about modern medicine, we have really good evidence based, large sample size research that tells us that there are no adverse effects that we know of in the fetus. And then later, I think that there's one study that sort of followed the kids, essentially the babies, up until the age of 18 and didn't find any
Mhm.
adverse. We don't have that data with microdosing psychedelics.
Right.
And that doesn't mean we're going to dismiss them. It means to proceed with caution. I will say a little plug because I get so excited about this topic. Moving away from pregnant moms, postpartum, this is a really
Ooh,
big need in the world, like how to support women postpartum, families postpartum, but we're talking about mamas. And there is a recent study that came out, I want to say within the last year, that looked at ketamine and the sort of uh, uh, how it shows up in breast milk. I can't remember the
right.
terminology, but to see, is it safe for postpartum women to receive ketamine treatment of some kind? And essentially the answer is yes, that there's a certain duration. And again, I don't know the exact, I think it was like 3 to 4 hours, pump and dump kind of a thing, where it's
Right.
untraceable. It's not traceable, right? So if you're a breastfeeding mom postpartum and you're worried about it, there is a study, I think 2 studies now, that look at the safety of that. And that's really exciting, not just that the study came out, but that we are living in a time where researchers are actually, in a controlled environment asking these important questions of like, how can these medicines support mental health for fill in the blank, right? Whether we're talking about veterans or postpartum mamas or anyone that's experienced, trauma, anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super exciting. And I think
Mhm.
that, in that conversation or in that dinner, meeting the women at the table, 2 of them shared with me, they said, "I was microdosing mushrooms all throughout pregnancy."
Mhm.
Another one of them does a lot of work with women postpartum, and she said that she loves to see people, taking that to support their mental health and, just
Mhm.
to help them kind of reconnect with their body and sort of like drawing the energy back to themselves. And then there was another woman that I met. This was at a conference in Vegas, but she gave a whole presentation on using ayahuasca. And
Mm.
so her clients will microdose ayahuasca from, conception through like
Mhm.
I think it was up to 7 months.
Mm.
And then from the 7 months to birth, you're
Mm.
you're not working with ayahuasca until you were actually in the contractions. And she said that it
Mm.
can really help, bring women
Mm.
through that whole birthing process. And she
Mm.
shared this
It's
beautiful
beautiful.
story of a woman who'd been struggling, in labor 8
Mhm.
hours and finally, said, "Okay, I'm willing to try this tincture. I'm willing to try a small amount
Yeah.
of ayahuasca." And then it was just like everything 20 minutes later, everything changed. Things started moving. And then
Yeah.
she was able to give birth. And so
Yeah.
it's
I
just,
love
I don't know.
hearing women talking about these things, like even you
Yeah.
now sharing the story with me and on the podcast. The more that we can normalize and hear stories, and that doesn't mean that we're going to proceed without caution. because that's
Right.
something I feel really strongly about, as do most of us. Nobody's saying let's just haphazardly, recklessly, indulge in drug use. Um, even microdoses, and I say this in the book that it's not published yet, but the book I'm writing, and even in the podcast, even in microdoses, these are delicate substances. Like, we need to be careful, and finding a professional that you trust. So if it isn't your medical doctor, finding a different, medical provider. Keep looking. They are out there. There are medical doctors, nurse practitioners, naturopaths, that are open to and familiar with the research and can help guide you in the safest way possible. And that
Yes.
is so important. I'm all for, like, citizen research. Definitely listen to your neighbor's experience, but also do what feels right for you. If listening to your neighbor's success story with microdosing isn't enough to help you feel safe and like you can move forward with the best and the most informed decision, then don't do it. Listen to that internal wisdom. That's
Right.
what this work's all about. And I know you know this. Like, it's about listening to your inner wisdom, not your neighbor's inner wisdom, not my inner wisdom, not your, it's like that's that's a part of it. It's pretty special. It's pretty special stuff. And also, a part of this education that I think we're both so excited about is to be excited, be enthusiastic, shout it from the rooftops, and also rein it in, like, hold
Right.
on a second. I mean, right? Like, we need to be cautious. We need to be asking questions. We need to be also not just asking questions to the modern medicine docs, right? Like, let's look at
Right.
what is the ancient wisdom telling us. One of my biggest pet peeves lately, I'll just share,
Yeah,
is, and
please.
I'm guilty of it too. On my website at one point it said modern science and ancient wisdom. It's a thing. It's really irritating and annoying to me. This, but like everyone's buzz term, fusing modern science with ancient wisdom. It's not that I don't love the idea. I do. I'm so glad we're doing that finally. To me, it seems to be repeating the same mistakes that we often make with feeling like we have the superior model.
Mm.
Like, that just because modern science now says, oh, yeah, ancient wisdom is pretty great. Let's go ahead. And now that we're cool with it, we've got some evidence based research. Now we can sort of like say, yeah, let's infuse it with ancient wisdom. It's almost offensive to the wisdom that's
Right.
ancient. It's a,
Right.
it's like, you're going to come and tell, Grandma Ayahuasca, like that, oh, yeah, tell us all about your work. This is so exciting. And, she's like, what do you mean, my work? This is a part of our, this is intergenerational medicine work. This is a part of our culture and our way of life and our way of being. And you got these, docs that in their in their front country life are wearing lab coats, but when they're coming to talk to
Right.
Mama Aya, they're like, of the people. And it's just one of my pet peeves. It's like, let's just call it what it is. We are finally recognizing the power of ancient wisdom. We are finally recognizing it as legitimate. And that doesn't mean it hasn't always been legitimate, right? It's that sort of
Exactly.
like superior lens that we tend to have, in different
Exactly.
cultural.
To me, it
Anyway,
feels kind of like those are I hear what you're saying. And I think that depending on, just someone's belief system, their background, what they grew up with, they might buy into one system over another, right? And I was just thinking there's this really incredible woman that I had the opportunity to meet who is a member of the Hunikuin tribe. So she's from Brazil, and she is a shaman, a female shaman, and also a medical doctor. And she works out of this hospital that it's kind of, on like the boundary between just vast Amazon nature and, kind of
the
access
environment we
to.
all want to live in.
Right, exactly, exactly, and it was really cool because she was sharing this story about, a woman who had come in to give birth, and the baby, was not well. There was something wrong, and she could see, this baby is unwell. If they return to the village, this child could die. And there was this tension and this standoff between the medical doctors on her team, who were strictly, scientific approach, who looked at the child and said, oh, well, we have an infection, we need to give antibiotics.
Mm,
And then the parents were like, whoa, we don't know who you are or what this substance is. This isn't from the
mhm,
earth. This isn't natural. And if there's anything wrong, it's in the spirit world. It's not in the physical body. And so this woman, being of both worlds, was able to go in there and kind of be, the translator or the conduit
mm,
for the treatment. And she ended up combining, and so had the antibiotics delivered, and also
mm.
went through all of the ceremonies and the prayers and the smudging, for like the spirit cleansing. And she walked out of there saying, to be honest, I don't know what it was that did the trick. I can't say, that it was this versus that. But she's like, but I can tell you that the entire medical team said, oh, that child survived because of the antibiotics. And the husband and wife and their family said, our child survived because of
Yeah,
the spirit cleansing.
yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it so much. You're talking about one of the things that is like, it's so, so, so important to remember. And I know that we touched on this subject, like the lenses that we experience and understand the world are really important to attune to. And
Yes.
that story you just shared, I love, love, love it. It's a really good reminder, of that concept, but also a story in my own life where my brother, and I've talked about this before I actually think I talked about it on another podcast. My brother was one of those rare cases. This was long before COVID, where he almost died of H1N1 back in, I think it was 2008.
Oh,
This was
wow.
before anybody knew that like something like that could happen from a respiratory illness. But he was in a medically induced coma for over 2 weeks. They
Mm.
gave him less than a 10% chance to live, and he did survive and is thriving and doing well. Medical, they called him the medical miracle. And the interesting thing is that there was another guy, the same age and same profile, that as my brother, so 27 years old, no underlying conditions, that was in a same state of near death, and essentially he died at the University of Washington, and my brother was at Northwest University, which is a sort of a branch of the University of Washington. And so that's how we got to learn about this other person after the fact, this other guy. And so we asked the question, and the docs asked too, what was different, because the medical care was almost exactly the same. The interventions, they had him in a rotoprone machine, which is sort of like this awful. I mean, it's for people with the acute respiratory distress syndrome. It helps. They're upside down, naked in this very robotic looking machine. They're on a respirator, and
Oh,
the
gosh.
difference between the two, this other guy did not have the same community that my brother had. This other patient didn't have people singing and praying and coming in and talking to him and playing music. So my brother's a musician, and we had music playing in his hospital room. We insisted on it. It was one of our broadest purpose and meaning while he's fighting for his life, that it play at all times. So the nurses and doctors that came in and out of his room, they always heard music. There was music playing at all times. That's not the case for most patients. And how
Right?
bonkers is that? For those of you that know how powerful music is, why are we not playing people's favorite music in the ICU? If it's safe,
Yeah.
right? Like, sure, turn it off when you're doing your medical stuff when it's needed. So, and the doctors told us that he couldn't hear us, that he's in a medically induced coma. He's way, way deep in the, in a coma. He's not able to hear you. And we were like, we don't care what you say. We believe
Right?
in the power of
Exactly.
prayer and song and just our presence with him. And of course,
Exactly.
later when he came out of coma, he had all of these really vivid memories of hearing people. Like at one point, he heard me, and there was something I would always say to him when I went into his room. I would say, "Don't be scared, brother. Don't be scared. Don't give up. Don't be scared. don't give up. I said it almost like a mantra. And he came out of that coma and he was like, oh my God, there was one point I was on my knees. I was fighting all these wars. I mean, he was in an altered dream state, right?
Right.
And I heard a voice, and I think it was yours, saying, and he quoted me, right? Like, don't be
Oh my
scared, don't
gosh.
give up. And I was like, you see, Dr. Schmochter, like, don't tell me what he can and cannot,
Wow.
This is
I have goosebumps.
psychedelics.
That gave me goosebumps. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So,
That is so
those
incredible.
stories, the story you shared about the woman and the ayahuasca, it's a similar story. Like, the doctors and the research are probably saying, well, it was this, this, and this. They're not saying it was the music. They're not saying it was the prayer. They're not saying, and they should be. One of the things, so there's a chapter in my book that I love. I talk about actually in the Mary Poppins scene, that very famous song that she sings when she's trying to get the kids to take a medicine. Just a
Oh, a
spoonful of sugar,
spoonful of
medicine go down.
Yes.
It's so great, right? And I talk about how if modern science doctors with their lab coats were to come in and say, okay, let's really break down if this medicine that Mary Poppins is giving them is working. So the first thing they're going to do is they're actually going to take away the sugar. They're going to say the sugar that helps the medicine go down, it's not an active ingredient of the medicine. We don't need it. Let's get rid of it, right? And then they're going to also say, we also don't need Mary Poppins singing her little song. Like, that's going to get in the way of our study. And so what they're going to end up doing, let's fast forward to how it would really go down. They would have the kids show up in a sterile environment and be, force fed this medicine. And then they would say, well, their cold symptoms got better. And then guess what? Those kids are going to be referred to mental health services within months because they didn't get Mary Poppins' song, they didn't get her cuddles,
Right.
and they didn't get the sweet sugar.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The energy with which you are surrounded or, the kind of the intention or the energy with which a medicine is being delivered. And I know that obviously just how incredibly important it is. And I think that, similar with psychedelics, if someone is in just kind of more of a and not to say that I have any issues with recreational use of psychedelics, but if you're just kind of don't really care, popping a pill, doing whatever versus sitting in ceremony with music, with community,
Yeah.
with prayer, right? Like it's going to be
Because
a
that
very
stuff's
different.
also the medicine.
Yes.
It's not just the
Yes.
substance, it's all of it. It's the
Exactly.
intention. We know this now. We have actual study, we have that sort of evidence-based studies that show us that individuals that, let's say have PTSD and they go through a protocol that includes MDMA or psilocybin or ketamine. And then we look at the other kind of citizen study where the same profile person with PTSD, is using it recreationally at a dance festival or something. We don't actually see, we may see temporary alleviation of symptoms, but we don't actually see that has lasting effects. We're not seeing that. So it's almost proof of it isn't just the substance. It is the ceremony. It's the intention.
Yes.
It's having a guide to help you attune to rather than just recreationally. And I too am not opposed to that, but it's a different intention. I mean, if we're talking
Yes.
about mental health, which is my expertise, right? And like psychedelics and the intersection, it is really important to look at the question of, but to what degree can you just take it on your own and feel better? Well, I mean, of course you can, right? But like, we could break that down with any substance. Like, if I'm drinking wine by myself, it's going to be a much different experience than if I'm drinking wine in a dinner setting with my family and friends. Like,
Yes.
I'm just because the family, friends, the laughter, the stories, the connection, that's
Yes.
medicine too.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
I love that psychedelic science has brought us attention to that, this idea of what is the medicine, yeah,
Yes.
I just love it.
Oh, I love it. Well, Sabrina, I meant to ask you at the beginning about your origin story. So I would love if we could
Yeah,
just jump back and
we'll just rewind. Totally. I love
rewind
it.
that. And yeah, because I know that a lot of the work that you're doing right now is with ketamine, but just feeling curious about how you got into this whole world of the intersection of mental health and
Yeah.
psychedelics.
I love it. It's such a good question. I know I love origin story questions. So, we'll go all the way back to the beginning, the day I was born. I'm just kidding. No. But really, I know, right? That would be so great if I had like a succinct way to be like, I came out of the womb and I knew. And in a way, it's true. It does begin long before. I mean, I had a psychedelic experience where I got to meet the origin of my soul and my ancestors, and I got to go there, right? Like I did, and that was real for me. But that's a different podcast. That's a different episode. So my origin story begins how I came into the mental health field and then later the intersection with psychedelics. And I think that how I came into the mental health field was just, I'm a product of my parents, and I think maybe even in my DNA, right? Like, so I was raised by a mother and a father who were both in the helping professions. So my mother is a nurse and my father is now a retired physician. And so I think naturally I just grew up in an environment where I was raised by these humans that were, working to help people. And so that sent the message of like, oh, that's what we do. And maybe I was already slated that way, when I came into the world. And then in particular, I love my father. So he's a Syrian man. So he came into this country when he was, I think, in his 20s. And his story is such a powerful one because he, in many ways, lived in poverty in Syria, and really kind of found his way towards medicine, and not just any kind of medicine. He ended up becoming a neonatologist. And so for those that don't know, neonatology is a doctor that specializes in working with premature babies. And so when you think about it, so I was raised by a man that takes care of the most vulnerable human beings that can exist in this world. And that's powerful, right? Like you have to be, there's a certain, I remember, and my father's still alive to this day, and I love him dearly. I remember being keenly aware of like his hands were always very soft and tender. Because I think he has to like wash his hands all the time and wear gloves and all that, working with little babies. But I think there's also, he had to learn how to be really gentle and tender and specific, and just like the messaging of that is so cool. And I think that influenced me. I remember being really fascinated by this study that he was doing back in the day. He was one of the docs that brought over this method of kangaroo care, which anybody that's been in a NICU will have heard of kangaroo care. It's
I haven't
basically,
heard of this.
yeah, it's the science around skin to skin contact and how powerful and healing. It's about the medicine of skin to skin contact, which like, oh, who doesn't get excited about that? Like more of that, please. Right. I mean, so this was back, I was a kid. I mean, I must've been, I don't even know. I'd have to double check, but he helped bring it over to this country. I think it originated in Switzerland with a doctor named Dr. Luddington, I believe. Anyway, so basically it was all these studies that proved that these premature babies were really needing skin to skin contact. And it doesn't even have to be with the birth parent, right? It could be just a primary, like let's say that the kid for, whatever reason is born, their parents aren't around and it's a premature baby. And so they would have nurses, literally take off their shirts in the NICU, put the baby safely, whether it had to be, hooked up or not, on their bare chest. I mean, they do it now. They talk about skin to skin contact. It's like, it's like anything. It's normal. And what they saw was that babies temperature regulated, their heart rates, their blood pressure, and they healed more quickly. They got stronger, right? Which is such a powerful message. So my origin story comes from just being influenced by these two magical humans, my mom and dad, working in the helping professions with all these different, things that I would hear about like at the dinner table and was just fascinated by. And so I gravitated towards, just wanting to help people. And then beyond that, so this is where I love to talk about kind of how I came into psychedelics. And I love to talk about it, not just because it helps me anchor in how I came to be working in this space, but also because it directly speaks to the definition, how we define psychedelics. Because my coming into being curious about psychedelics, it doesn't actually have to do with the substance, the hallucinogenic substance, excuse me, substances that we're all familiar with, like magic mushrooms, psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca. Now these medicines that are becoming more and more popular. Psychedelic, like the definition, is thought to come from these two words, meaning like mind or soul manifesting, which is amazing, right? And then if you think about the word manifest, it comes from, again, two different words, which means like to make something clear, to have it come to be visible, to manifest, right? And so mind manifesting exists without any, substances. It can exist in, and for me, it was dream state. So I happen to be somebody that has really vivid dreams and have since I was a little girl. And so I naturally was really curious, like, what is happening when we dream? This is insane. How is it possible that I'm dreaming about a world that I don't even know if it's real or not, and I'm unconscious? Like, what? It's an altered state of consciousness. It's an expanded state of consciousness, which is often how we talk about psychedelic work. Is it's mind expansion, it's altered states, but you don't have to ingest a substance to get to that altered state. So I was naturally really interested in psychedelics just because of the dreams I was having. And then the way my family would talk about those dreams, like crazy cool stuff is happening in dreams, not just my own, but, time travel that can happen, or, something magical. Like I remember this story my grandfather would tell about how he was a career military man. He was in the army in the Green Beret, and traveled, was stationed all over the world because of that. And one of the times he was stationed back in the day, he got word that his mother was really ill and that she was probably not going to make it. And it came, in the form of like a, original snail mail, right? Like a telegram or something. And, so he just had to kind of sit with that while also, just doing what he was doing where he was stationed. And he ended up having this really vivid dream where he remembers being, dressed in his formal military attire, and he went to his mother's bedside in the hospital she was in, and he had this real heart to heart with her, and basically said, like, you're going to be fine. This is not your time, and I'm here with you, and I love you, and I'll be home soon. It was a chat, and that was it. And he woke up and he felt relieved. He was like, I kind of feel like my mom's going to be okay. I had this great dream. It's fine. I went and told her all I needed to tell her. She knows. And later, when he came back from where he was stationed and he was able to reconnect with his family, he was sitting at a dinner table with his sister. And he was telling her, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, I had this dream about mom. It was so vivid." And she got really white and was like, "Oh my God, you got to talk to mom. She had the same dream." And so he goes and he talks to his mom and says, "Hey, I heard you had a crazy dream about me. I had a crazy dream about you." And his mom goes on to, before he had a chance to say anything, explain the dream to vivid detail. So those are the stories I grew up on, like that. I believe my grandfather. He is a trustworthy man, like he's not just trying to entertain me as a kid. So I was like, oh my goodness, whoa, something is happening here. And, in comes, fast forward as an adult, introduced to psychedelics. I didn't find the substances of psychedelics until my adulthood. But naturally, I think living in Oregon and paying attention to just all the different, what is it, Measure 109, and things like that. I was like, okay, I want to pay attention. And as a researcher and teacher myself, I started to, sort of like, just attune. And the more I was reading, the more I was like, okay, I think it's time to see where this can go. And then in comes my own microdose, and psychedelic experience story, which will be a part, and I know we don't have time today, but it's a part of what inspired me to create the podcast that's going to launch its first episode in like 2 weeks, called Microdose Your Marriage. And it is, excuse me, the first episode is one where I talk about my story and my, kind of how healing microdosing and even psychedelic experiences guided in ceremony have just been transformative for my own life, and how that's really led me to be so enthusiastic and excited about the potential healing benefits that these medicines have. And I love the idea that it's not just substances. When I say I work in the psychedelic space, I also am a breathwork facilitator. I'm a death doula. I'm a big fan of just holding space for families in particular and relationships, because I do feel like that's, for me, a preventative model. Like if we can help people feel better in their relationships, whether it's an end, um, a breakup or not, if they can be healthier in it or coming out of it, then they're going to be healthier beings, period. And are going to be less, if they have Mary Poppins, right? Go all the way back to that surf. They've got song and dance and someone to love on them. They're going to fare better. So that's part of what I bring too, not that I'm like singing and dancing with my clients. I'm not opposed to that at retreats, maybe, but not when I see people in my private practice. We're not doing too much of that, but we do sit on the ground. We do breathe together. We do somatic work. We do meditation. We do breath work. If they're not, either appropriate fit for a psychedelic intervention, like a ketamine or a psilocybin, we'll do alternatives to that so that they can tap into that expanded state, which, I mean, the benefits. The benefits are so vast. Like it, the thing I love most about psychedelics is that they have this capacity, psychedelic work, I should say, not just the substances, going into an expanded, altered state where your frontline workers, so to speak, your protectors, are trusting enough to just kind of sit back. It's like you're turning down the noise that is high alert noise, where you're distanced from your truth. You're distanced from, like, what do I need? What do I want? What am I feeling right now? In a safe way, especially for trauma, people that have experienced trauma of all kinds. It's a way to dissociate that's productive and temporary. It's like coming back home to yourself, just reconnecting with your truth. And sometimes that truth is also really hard to sit with. And now you don't have to do it alone, right? You're sitting with it, listening. I mean, grief work, oh my goodness, some of the most profound grief work I have done has been in medicine ceremony, where I'm sobbing and purging, and my body's, sort of like undulating with waves of grief. And I'm feeling it, but maybe more safe and trusting of the process than without the psychedelic, expanded state,
Oh, I love that you say that, because that resonates so much for me. I feel like in that psychedelic space, when the protectors are kind of, quieted down and they're not standing guard, it's like all of a sudden you have this expansive space to explore some of those really difficult emotions. And for me too, processing grief, forgiveness, like all of those things. And it's like these emotions that just get trapped in the body. And because our protectors want us to not hurt, they don't allow us to feel it. But if you don't feel it, then you're not going to be able to process it. And so it's just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a beautiful opportunity. And I feel like, people say to me a lot, oh, well, I've got control issues, or, I'm a control freak, so I never want to work, with these substances. And I'm like, wow, if only you knew that that control is one of those many protectors that you could have step aside and then, like you said, come home to your true self.
Mhm. And I love that you're bringing up the control issues or the control example. I hear that all the time. Like, oh God, I can't. It's too scary. I'm gonna not dismiss, and I don't hear you dismissing it. I'm gonna listen to that. Like, okay, well, guess what? We're gonna go, and I love this expression. I wish I could remember who it came from. It's not mine. Go at the pace of trust. Go at the pace of trust. And so, and this gets into a little bit of IFS work, which we don't have time to, but it's parts work, right? It's like this idea that we all have different parts, and they serve a really, really, important function where they're protecting and keeping us comfy most of the time. And it's important, though, to get to know those. What are they doing? That's the control, right? When someone says that they're a control freak, I love control too. People that don't like control, that easily surrender, they kind of scare me, frankly. Like I'm like, wait, I want to be driving the car. I don't make no mistake about it. Like this is doesn't. I'm much more
Yes.
comfortable if I'm in control versus if you are. It's my own stuff. But I wouldn't take someone like that and just launch them into outer space. You have to get consent, not just from, I mean, of course you have to get consent from the person, of course, but you also have to get consent from those protectors, from those internal defenses. Like, let's get to know those. Let's spend time with those. And so it isn't a one size fits all. That's a really important thing. I mean, yes, there's this, I don't want to even say standardized. I don't necessarily like that. But there is an approach that is the better approach, which is that you have preparation sessions where the facilitator's getting to know you and getting to know your story, getting to know, but helping you better get to know yourself. Those, getting to know those protectors inside of you. What are they protecting? What is the protection serving? And how can you thank that? And then invite, like, almost like stand down, like it'll be okay. But if you skip that step, that's where people are going to have really strong reactions, either a negative experience during or after. And it's going to be really confusing because if you think about it, like, of course, those internal defenses are going to be like, what the did you do? I've been protecting you my whole life. And like, you took this medicine to like try to get me to quiet down and all this stuff came, like, no, they're actually going to go the other extreme right now. And I see this in my practice. People come to me and they're like, I'm only coming to you because you know about psychedelics, but I had this horrible experience either with microdosing or with bigger doses where all of a sudden their nervous system is like revved up in a way that never has been. And they're scared. They're like, this isn't what I heard psychedelics do. Like, psychedelics are supposed to be like chill and like help me attune to my inner wisdom and truth. And like, that is not my experience. More often than not, what I'm seeing is that happens when there hasn't been good guidance on the front end, when people haven't taken the time to go at the pace of trust. We rush into one size fits all. And that's the thing I fear most in the space, that the more these become, standardized and normalized, is like, rather than sitting with Mama Aya or Mary Poppins, like, who's going to like get to know you and sing song and like sit with you, we're going to be like, okay, well, 3 sessions to prep for everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what your trauma story. There's three sessions to prep, and then we're going to do blast off. We're going to send you with a macro dose to outer space. Then we're going to bring you back. We're going to do 3 intentions, or
integration sessions.
Thank you. And then just go off onto your own. And I wish you well. It's harmful. It's potentially harmful. I like a framework. I mean, of course, frameworks are helpful. But we can't ever start to like default to this one size fits all. Otherwise, we're just going to make the same mistake that we've already been making with SSRIs and with, traditional talk therapy. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you've been in therapy for 2 years, you better be asking your therapist, why is it taking so long? And maybe there's a good reason. I'm not dismissing that. Some people, but also, why is it taking so long? And is there something that could be helpful for you? And then my final note, because I know you're gonna do your thing and wrap us up here, is that psychedelics are not for everyone. They're not. They're just not. Right? Like, not everybody should run a marathon right away. Not everybody should cold plunge. Like, there are contraindications that are real safety risks, and so that's my public service announcement plug towards the end here.
Thank you, Sabrina. Well, I know that throughout the episode, we've kind of been making mention of your book. So could you give us just a real quick teaser? I really wanted to dive in more deeply, but
That's okay.
Just something to give us a sense. And
yeah. So I'm writing a book that hopefully will be published, I want to say spring of 2025. And it's called Microdose Your Marriage. And it's basically my story around how healing microdosing and psychedelic work has been for my own life and my own marriage. And I say this in the first episode, the first podcast, and I say it in the book that when I talk about microdose my marriage, I like to give away the ending, and it's not the ending that most people expect, because it ended. It was a happy ending. I dissolved my marriage. I am no longer married. That's my Microdose Your Marriage story. And I often say, like, don't tune me out. Why should you listen to someone that's talking about microdose your marriage when your marriage ended? Well, because it ended in a way that is amicable and loving and conscious, conscious uncoupling. And that term that was made popular, I think, by Gwyneth Paltrow, and is originally a approach by Catherine Woodard, I believe, Woodward. So the book is about that. It's about my story. It's about my excitement around psychedelics in general. And then the podcast, same name, Microdose Your Marriage. It's also a business that I'm a branch of my existing business. The website will come out soon at www.microdoseyourmarriage.com. And that is, I'm so excited about. I'm excited about the podcast. I'm, of course, excited about my book that I've really been writing for years, if we're honest. But I'm excited about the offering of psilocybin work that I will be doing, legally here in Oregon. And there's a wait list right now for couples that are interested to begin in January. And it has to do with relationship relationship work with psychedelics. So with the support
Beautiful.
of either micro or macro or bigger doses. And so there's different tracks. There's 4 tracks. The 3 that are that I'm most excited about. The first one is for couples that want to repair and stay together and strengthen intimacy, communication. So I take my 20 years of work with families and couples, and infuse that into the approach. So there's that track. And then there's the one for people that want clarity, because I often do have couples coming saying, like, we're desperate, we need help. And part of that story that they have is, we're not even sure if we're going to make it. And so it's like, people call it maybe discernment counseling or clarity counseling. They want to get clear. That's back to that original word, manifest, right? How to bring something and make it more clear. And that's the work we're doing. So that's one of the tracks, is helping people maybe get more clear about whether they're going to stay together or not. And then if they're not going to stay together, wow, that's when we continue to work on what's a supportive way to help you end. And that's the third track. So either couples coming that already know that they want to have a mindful ending, a conscious uncoupling, and psychedelics. I mean, there is research that's looking at conflict resolution with psychedelics. And one of the guests that I am going to have is on the show is Natalie Ginsburg. And she's just such a beautiful human. She's a global officer for MAPS, and was a part of the research that looked at conflict resolution with ayahuasca, Palestinians and Israelis, to see how it can help soften defenses, help people just return to their humanness, so that's my just life's passion right now, is leaning on this, psychedelics as an assistant to the work that's already helpful, but it just expedites, right? So you're not going to come see me, take a pill, and be on your way. We're going to lay a foundation. We're going to talk about the patterns in your relationship that have been beautiful and working. We're also going to talk about the ones that are not serving and are getting in the way, and then set intentions for what do you want to see improve. And that means for endings too. That's the one I feel so strongly about, is if we can have better endings, if we can have happier endings, we will, everyone fares better. It's a ripple effect. It's intergenerational healing. Intergenerational healing. Instead of intergenerational trauma, you're role modeling intergenerational healing, so that your children, my children, will fare better, because now they have 2 parents, or at least one. It only takes one, by the way. Better if it's 2, of course, but it could just be one. To create that environment of, like, yes, something ended, but it was a loving ending, and now we get to have a new way of being. And so that's hopefully makes sense, that summary of the book, the
Yeah,
podcast,
it does.
all
I
the
mean, so I'm hearing you've got some awesome work with essentially psychedelic assisted couples counseling, and that could be for deepening, it could be for discernment, or it could
yes,
be for dissolution.
100%. Nailed it.
Beautiful.
Thank you
Beautiful.
for having me.
Amazing.
This has
Thank
been
you
so
so
fun.
much for coming on, Sabrina. I just am such a fan of all of the work that you're doing, and I'm so grateful to have you as part of my community here in Central Oregon, and just excited
Likewise.
to see where you go and
Thank
what
you.
comes next.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah,
All right. We'll
thank
see you.
you.